Welcome, dear listeners, to this cozy mystery adventure in the style of the incomparable Agatha Christie. Settle into your favorite armchair with a cup of tea as we join the sharp-eyed Miss Jane Marple in the peaceful village of St. Mary Mead. Our tale, Miss Marple and the horror of the crime, unfolds in the misty mornings and gossip-filled afternoons of the 1940s English countryside. No gore or frights here. Just clever puzzles, charming characters, and a satisfying unraveling of secrets. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Shadow over Gossington Hall. Even the rooks in the elms around the church seem to have agreed to speak in whispers. Miss Jane Marple sat in the bow window of her small Georgian house in the High Street, a half-finished baby's booty in her lap. At 78, she knitted with the same unhurried precision she applied to everything else. The wool, a soft, heathery pink, was wound twice round her little finger so that the tension never varied by so much as a fraction. Yet her needles had been still for fully 7 minutes. That alone would have told the initiated that something was amiss. Across the road, Mrs. Bantry's Daimler stood outside the post office, its bonnet pointed toward Gossington Hall as though the car itself were anxious to be home. Dolly Bantry had driven into the village at 20 minutes past 9, which was unusual. She rarely stirred before 10. She had left again at 25 past, scattering gravel as if pursued. Miss Marple noted the time exactly. One never knew when 20 minutes might matter. Cherry Baker, Miss Marple's daily help, came in from the scullery wiping her hands on a tea towel printed with coroneted crests. A gift from a former employer who had turned out to be a duke's mistress, though no one in St. Mary Mead ever referred to that directly. "They're saying the colonel's dead, miss." Cherry's voice trembled with the delicious awe that only sudden death can produce in a village. Miss Marple laid the booty carefully on the drum table. "Dead, Cherry? In what circumstances?" "Found in his study, slumped over his desk like he was took sudden." Mrs. Bantry come down herself to telephone Dr. Haydock, white as a winding sheet. Mr. Polk, the postman, seen her. He was delivering the second post up at the hall, and she was that shook she dropped her gloves in the hydrangeas and never noticed. Miss Marple's pale blue eyes traveled to the window again. The Daimler had not returned. "Was the colonel expected to be unwell?" she asked delicately. Cherry gave a meaningful sniff. "Fit as a fiddle," everyone said. "Walked 5 miles every morning round the estate, barking at the gardeners. Mind you," she lowered her voice, "there's some as says he had a dicky heart and wouldn't admit it. And some as says—" She paused, savoring the drama. "Enemies." The word hung in the little parlor like wood smoke. Miss Marple reached for her tapestry bag and drew out a small notebook bound in faded red morocco. The same book in which, 30 years earlier, she had recorded the measurements of a rockery that later proved to conceal a body. She turned to a fresh page and wrote, in her neat schoolgirl hand, "Tuesday, 9th October, Colonel Lucius Bantry, found dead in study, Gossington Hall, time of discovery between 8:45 and 9:05 a.m. Dolly's movements. Manner, apparently sudden heart. Enemies?" She underlined the last word twice. Outside, the church clock struck 10 with its usual leisurely chime, as though reluctant to disturb the morning. Miss Marple closed the notebook. "Cherry, I think I shall take a little walk. If anyone calls, say I have gone to offer my condolences to Mrs. Bantry." Cherry's eyes widened. "You'll be the first, miss. Half the village is pretending to weed their front paths so they can watch the gate." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "In that case, I shall go the back way." The back way meant the footpath that skirted the churchyard, dipped beneath the U-tunnel, and emerged opposite the stile into Gossington Park. The morning was crisp, with a smell of leaf mold and wood smoke. A robin followed Miss Marple along the fence, hopping from post to post in the hope of disturbed insects. She walked slowly, her stick tapping the gravel in soft counterpoint to her thoughts, yet her gaze missed nothing. At the stile, she paused. Fresh tire tracks crossed the muddy patch where the lane joined the park, wide tires, deep tread. The grocer's van used narrow ones. These belonged to Dr. Haydock's Humber. He must have come in a hurry. The mud was flung outward in 2 long splatters. Miss Marple stepped carefully over the stile and followed the drive toward the hall. Gossington Hall was a rambling, early Victorian mansion, half hidden by copper beeches and a magnificent Wellingtonia that had been planted the year the Duke was killed at Waterloo. Today the house looked closed, almost listening. Every curtain was drawn except on the ground floor to the left of the front door, the study. Dolly Bantry herself opened the door before Miss Marple reached the bell. She was dressed in a violet wool frock that made her look even more flamboyantly pretty than usual. But her eyes were red-rimmed and her carefully waved hair had escaped its pins in several places. "Jane, thank heavens, come in, come in. The police are here. Well, Inspector Slack from Much Benham, and he's being perfectly beastly." Miss Marple stepped into the hall, noting in one comprehensive glance the umbrella stand, one Malacca cane missing, the barometer, still reading set fair, and the silver salver on the console table bearing 3 calling cards, all turned face down. Someone had been very particular about not leaving names. Dolly led her through the green baize door that separated the family rooms from the servants' quarters, then into the study. It was a square room lined with books that nobody read and decorated with the heads of animals that nobody had liked even when alive. A bright fire crackled in the grate, doing its best to dispel the chill of shock. Colonel Bantry sat, or rather lolled, in the big leather armchair facing the fireplace. His head had fallen forward, his chin rested on the knot of his regimental tie. One arm hung limply over the side of the chair, the fingers almost touching the carpet. On the desk beside him stood a cup and saucer, willow pattern, almost empty. And a small silver teaspoon lay on the blotter as though it had been dropped in haste. Dr. Haydock was bending over the body, stethoscope dangling. He straightened as the ladies entered. "Miss Marple," he said gravely. He was a tall, stooping man with a permanent stoop from listening to chests, and today his face was grayer than his hair. Inspector Slack, a square man with a red complexion and the expression of one who suspects everybody on principle, snapped shut a notebook. "Mrs. Bantry says you're a friend of the family, ma'am. I'd be obliged if you'd both wait in the drawing room. This is a suspicious death until proved otherwise." Dolly gave a little cry. Miss Marple laid a gentle hand on her arm. "Come, dear. The inspector must do his duty." In the drawing room, a vast apartment full of chintz and faded photographs of long-dead hounds, Dolly sank onto a sofa and pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "I found him, Jane. I'd been to the hen house. There was a fox last night. And when I came in, he was just sitting there. I thought he'd fallen asleep. He often dozed after breakfast, but when I touched his hand, it was cold." Her voice broke. "Then I saw the cup. He always took tea at 9 sharp. Lapsang, no milk, no sugar. But this smelled sweet, like almonds almost." Miss Marple sat very still. "Almonds, you say?" Dolly nodded miserably. "And there was a little sediment at the bottom. Mary, our maid, swears she made it exactly as usual. But Lucius would never have drunk it if it tasted odd. You know how fussy he was." Miss Marple's mind traveled back over 30 years of village tragedies. The chemist's wife who had taken laurel water thinking it was tonic. The choirmaster who had died of cyanide said to have been meant for rats. The major who had swallowed his wife's heart pills in mistake for aspirin. All perfectly explicable, until one looked a little deeper. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Vicarage. Miss Marple arrived at the vicarage precisely at 3, carrying a small brown paper parcel tied with string. She had changed into her second-best dove-gray coat and the felt hat with the velvet pansy that made her look exactly like everybody's favorite aunt, which was, of course, the point. Griselda Clement opened the door herself. At 29, the vicar's wife was still the prettiest woman in St. Mary Mead, with corn-colored hair that refused to stay tidy and a laugh that made even the church wardens forgive her for wearing lipstick on Sundays. "Miss Marple, thank heaven. Leonard is in the most dreadful state. He's been pacing the study like a caged heron ever since Inspector Slack telephoned." Miss Marple stepped into the hall, which smelled comfortingly of beeswax, chrysanthemums, and something faintly medicinal from the Reverend's greenhouse. "I have brought Leonard a little present," she said, offering the parcel. "Some of my nephew's homemade blackcurrant jelly, excellent for shock." Griselda's eyes filled with tears that were only partly theatrical. "You are an angel. Come through. He's trying to write his sermon and getting no further than dearly beloved." The drawing room was a pleasant muddle of chintz dog hair from Griselda's disreputable terrier Bones and piles of parish magazines. A small coal fire burned in the grate. On the mantelpiece stood a photograph of the Clements' wedding day. Leonard looking startled, Griselda radiant, and the best man who later ran away with a barmaid, smirking knowingly. Leonard Clement rose as Miss Marple entered. He was tall and thin, with the kind of face that looks permanently apologetic, and today his dog collar seemed to be choking him. "Miss Marple, this is good of you. Slack wants me at the hall at 4:30 to assist with inquiries. What on earth does he think a clergyman can tell him about cyanide?" Miss Marple sat in the chair nearest the fire and arranged her skirt with care. "Perhaps he wishes to know whether the colonel had made a good death, spiritually speaking." Leonard gave a short, unhappy laugh. Spiritually, Lucius Bantry hadn't darkened a church door since the armistice, except to complain about the flower rhoda. "We had words, rather heated words, only last Thursday." He stopped, aware that he had said too much. Miss Marple's needles began their soft, inevitable clicking. She was knitting something small and lavender-colored. No one ever discovered what it was to be, for she undid it every night and began again. "Words, Leonard? About money, perhaps?" The vicar flushed. "The church roof, actually. We need £300 before winter, or the rain will ruin the nave. I asked Lucius for a donation. He was the largest landowner. He told me to sell the silver candlesticks and stop whining for handouts. Not very Christian, I'm afraid." Griselda poured tea from a pot wearing a scarlet cozy embroidered with the words, "A gift from Landudno." The cups did not match. One had a crack, another was Worcester, the third bore the crest of a liner that had been torpedoed in 1942. Miss Marple accepted the Worcester cup and saucer. "And yet," she said gently, "you went to Gossington Hall yesterday morning, did you not? Old Mrs. Archer saw you leave the vicarage at 8:20 and return at 5 minutes to 10. Leonard spilt tea into his saucer. I had to return a book, a treatise on hybrid delphiniums. The colonel was interested in horticulture." Griselda gave her husband a sharp look. "You never mentioned that, darling." "It slipped my mind. So much has happened." Miss Marple sipped her tea. It was strong and hot, exactly as she liked it. "Tell me about the greenhouse, Leonard. I believe you have been experimenting with digitalis purpurea, foxgloves. Such handsome plants, but the leaves contain a most potent heart stimulant, or depressant in larger quantities." Leonard went very white. "Purely for study, I'm writing a paper for the Botanical Society. The colonel kindly allowed me to take cuttings from his border." He set his cup down with a clatter. "Good heavens, you can't think, Miss Marple, I swear I never—" "Of course not," she said tranquilly. "But Inspector Slack is not a gardener. He will see poison where there is only scholarship." At that moment, Bones the terrier erupted into the room, pursued by Dennis, the Clement's adopted urchin of 9, who was brandishing a cricket stump. "Mummy, there's a policeman at the gate. He's got a notebook and everything." Griselda scooped Dennis up before he could do further damage to the furniture. "That will be Constable Polk come to fetch Leonard. Run along, darling, and tell him the vicar will be 5 minutes." Dennis departed with reluctance, dragging the stump like a reluctant tail. Miss Marple rose. "Before you go, Leonard, one small thing. When you left the hall yesterday, did you happen to notice whether the study door was open or closed?" Leonard frowned in an effort of memory. "Open, I think. No, wait. Mary was polishing the hall table. She closed it as I passed. Said the colonel didn't like drafts." "Thank you," said Miss Marple. "That is most helpful." Outside, the October afternoon had turned misty. The yew trees in the churchyard loomed like mourning women. Miss Marple paused at the gate to speak to Constable Polk, a large, slow man who had once arrested a cow for wandering. "Tell me, Constable, has anyone taken a statement from Mr. Basil Blake yet?" Polk scratched his helmet. Chapter 3. Tea and Suspicions. Miss Marple entered Mrs. Price Ridley's establishment, officially the post office and tea rooms, unofficially the Central Intelligence Bureau of St. Mary Mead, precisely as the grandfather clock in the corner gave its preliminary wheeze. Every table was occupied. Conversation, which had been a steady 60 decibels, dropped to a hushed 30, the auditory equivalent of a theater curtain rising. Mrs. Price Ridley herself, majestic in bottle green velvet and a cameo the size of a saucer, bore down upon Miss Marple like a battleship under full steam. "Miss Marple, table by the window, best seat in the house. I've kept it since 4 o'clock. One knew you would come." She pronounced one, as though it were a royal plural. Miss Marple allowed herself to be installed in a chair that gave her a perfect view of the high street, and more importantly of every other occupant. She ordered lapsang souchong and a toasted tea cake, and folded her hands in the attitude of a harmless old lady who had never suspected anyone of anything worse than short-weight sugar. Within 3 minutes the room had rearranged itself. Miss Hartnell, angular and county, abandoned her solitary scone and joined Miss Marple. Miss Weatherby, who always wore mauve and smelled faintly of violet cashews, drifted across with the inevitability of a slow tide. Finally, Mrs. Lestrange, the mysterious newcomer who had taken the old manor house 6 months ago and never explained why, glided in and took the 4th chair without asking. 4 pairs of eyes fixed upon Miss Marple like polite but determined searchlights. "Well," said Miss Hartnell, unable to wait another second. "Is it true about the cyanide?" Miss Marple buttered her tea cake with maddening deliberation. "Inspector Slack has sent samples to the county analyst," she said at last. "We shall know tomorrow." But the scent of bitter almonds was unmistakable. Mrs. Lestrange spoke for the first time. Her voice was low, almost husky, the kind of voice that made men think of cigarettes in Paris. "Cyanide is so quick. One moment alive, the next gone. No time for farewells." She stirred her tea anti-clockwise, which Miss Marple noted as significant. Nobody in St. Mary Mead stirred anything anti-clockwise. Miss Weatherby gave a little shudder. "And the study door locked from the inside. However did the murderer leave?" Miss Hartnell leaned forward. "Unless," she whispered, "the colonel took the poison himself." 4 cups paused halfway to 4 lips. Miss Marple set her knife down with a small, decisive click. "Suicide is always possible," she said, "but unlikely. Colonel Bantry was not a man to leave loose ends. He had just rewritten his will, Dolly told me this morning. If he intended to die, he would have waited until the new will was signed and witnessed. No, this was murder, and murder most carefully planned." Mrs. Lestrange's dark eyes gleamed. planned by someone who knew his habits, who brought him his tea every morning at 9 sharp, who knew he took it black, no sugar, and would notice nothing amiss if a few drops of clear liquid were added. Miss Hartnell gasped. Mary the maid. Mary has worked at the hall for 7 years, Miss Marple said mildly. She is saving to marry young Bert Rundle at the garage. The colonel promised her £10 toward her bottom drawer. Hardly a motive for murder. Miss Weatherby lowered her voice to a thrilled squeak. Then what about Dr. Haydock? He was there yesterday afternoon. Mrs. Polk saw his car. And doctors know about poisons. Miss Marple poured herself a second cup. Doctors also know that cyanide leaves traces. If Dr. Haydock wished the colonel dead, he had 100 subtler ways. At that moment, the door opened with a cheerful jangle and Dolly Bantry swept in, veiled and tragic in black crepe, but still managing to look like a duchess playing a duchess. Conversation ceased entirely. Dolly made straight for Miss Marple's table. Jane, I must talk to you privately. Mrs. Price Ridley, scenting better drama elsewhere, began to clear tables with quite unnecessary clatter. The other ladies melted away like snow in sunshine. Dolly sank into the vacated chair and pulled off her gloves. Slack has been beastly. He asked me whether Lucius and I were happy. Happy? After 28 years of marriage and Lucius never once remembering my birthday. Of course we weren't happy, but we were married, which is different. Miss Marple patted her hand. What exactly did the inspector want to know, dear? About the will. Lucius changed it last month. Left everything to me, except £5,000 to Basil, provided he ceased to associate with actresses of low repute. Basil's phrase, not mine. If Basil didn't reform within a year, the money was to go to the Distressed Gentlewomen's Fund. Basil was livid. Miss Marple's eyes rested on the willow pattern plate that had once held her tea cake. A blue pagoda, a bridge, 3 figures running. She remembered another willow pattern plate, in a house in Torquay, and a death that had looked like accident until someone noticed the bridge had only 2 figures instead of 3. And the old will? She asked. Burnt. Lucius always burnt old wills in the study fire. I watched him do it. Outside, the mist had thickened into a real pea souper. The street lamps came on early, glowing like orange lanterns in the wool. Miss Marple and Dolly emerged from the tea rooms to find Basil Blake lounging against the post office wall, smoking another Turkish cigarette. He flicked ash onto the pavement with theatrical nonchalance. Hello, Aunt Dolly, come to buy morning hats? Dolly drew herself up. Really, Basil? Miss Marple studied the young man. His +4s were splashed with mud to the knee. London mud or country mud? His nails were manicured, but there was a scratch on his left hand, fresh and angry. Tell me, Basil, she said, what time did you leave London yesterday? Noon train. Got to Much Benham at 2:30, hired a taxi. Arrived here just after 3, ask the driver. Name of Higgs. He'll tell you. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Dolly said sharply, You never mentioned coming down yesterday. Didn't I? How remiss. Actually, I came to collect my uncle's shotgun. He promised it to me for the shoot. Found the house in uproar, of course. Chapter 4. The Garden's Secret. Somewhere a blackbird practices its aria, and Miss Marple is already in the garden of Gossington Hall, gloveless, kneeling on an old copy of the Times to protect her stockings. Dolly Bantry, wrapped in a quilted dressing gown the color of ripe damsons, finds her there. Jane, the police said no one was to touch anything, and here you are grubbing about like a mole. Miss Marple straightens, a broken foxglove stem in her hand. The sap has stained her fingers pale green. Touch, no, she says serenely. Look, yes. See how cleanly this was snapped, not cut. Someone grasped it in a hurry and twisted, and here, she points to a shallow depression in the soft earth. The print of a small, fashionable heel. Italian, I should say. Mary wears sensible block heels from Dulcis. Dolly stares. But the only person here yesterday in Italian shoes was... Exactly, says Miss Marple. They are joined by Inspector Slack, redder than ever in the cold air, accompanied by a young sergeant with a camera and the expression of one who has not yet had breakfast. Slack glares at the kneeling spinster. Miss Marple, this is a sealed area. Yet the seal was broken at approximately 3:20 yesterday afternoon, Miss Marple replies, rising stiffly. By a lady wearing size 4 court shoes, dove-gray suede with a Louis heel. The left shoe has a tiny nick on the outer edge. There you can see it in the impression. The sergeant kneels, measures, photographs. Slack's mustache bristles like an angry hedgehog. How the devil do you know the time? Miss Marple points to a patch of dew on the grass beside the footprint. Still undisturbed at 4 o'clock when Constable Polk made his round. He told me so himself. By 5 the sun had burned it off, therefore between 3 and 4:30. Slack opens his mouth, shuts it again, and contents himself with a glare that would have felled a lesser woman. Inside the house, the breakfast room smells of bacon and coffee. Basil Blake is attacking eggs with unnecessary violence. His left hand, Miss Marple notes, is now adorned with a strip of sticking plaster. Morning, Aunt Jane, he says without looking up. Come to dig for clues or just for the bacon? Dolly sweeps in, dressing gown abandoned for black wool and pearls. Basil, Inspector Slack wishes to see you in the study. Basil raises an eyebrow. Again? I've told him everything twice, unless he thinks I hid the cyanide in my cigarette case. He rises, lights a cigarette, and saunters out, leaving a trail of Turkish smoke. Miss Marple sips coffee. Dolly, dear, did Basil borrow your garden shears yesterday? Good heavens, no, he never gardens. Why? Because someone used them to clip a single leaf from the digitalis in the greenhouse. The blades have a nick. See? She produces the leaf, wrapped in tissue. The cut matches the nick on the shears hanging behind the potting shed door. Dolly's cup rattles in its saucer. At 9 o'clock, the post-mortem results arrive by telephone. Dr. Haydock reads them to Slack in the hall, voice carefully neutral. Death by hydrocyanic acid, massive dose, ingested between 8:55 and 9:05 a.m. No doubt whatever, Slack snorts. So the poison was in the tea and only one person brought the tray? Miss Marple, unnoticed in the shadows, finishes the sentence for him silently. And 3 other people had the opportunity to tamper with it afterwards. She slips away to the kitchen where Mary is polishing the copper pans until she can see her scared face in them. Mary, when you left the tray outside the study door, did you lock it? No, miss. The colonel always locked his own door when he was working. I just knocked and left the tray on the dumb waiter. And the key? On the hook inside the baize door, same as always. Miss Marple thanks her and goes in search of the dumb waiter, a miniature lift that runs between kitchen and study pantry. The rope is frayed. Someone heavier than Mary has used it recently. In the garden again, she finds old Mr. Pye, the gardener, leaning on his spade and regarding the foxglove border with mournful pride. Never seen such a show, miss. Hybrid digitalis. Mr. Clement gave me the seed. Deadly poison mine, but handsome. Miss Marple nods. Someone harvested more than beauty yesterday, Mr. Pye. Tell me, did you notice a lady in a gray coat near the greenhouse? Pye scratches his head. Come to think of it, yes. About 3 o'clock. Asked me where the lady's cloakroom was, then walked off toward the potting shed. Thought she was one of Mrs. Bantry's charity visitors. Miss Marple thanks him and walks slowly back to the house. In the potting shed, she finds what she expected. A scrap of gray suede caught on a nail, and beside it, half hidden under a flower pot, a tiny glass vial labeled Tincture of Digitalis, empty. She wraps both in her clean handkerchief and returns to the breakfast room where Slack is now interrogating Basil. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. The air smells of carbolic wet wool and fear. Mrs. Lestrange sits very straight on a hard wooden chair, hat on her knee, gray suede gloves folded neatly on top like a sleeping cat. Across the table, Inspector Slack drums his fingers. Beside him, Dr. Haydock stands with the weary patience of a man who has seen too many deaths. Miss Marple is there by special dispensation, perched on a stool that makes her look even smaller and more bird-like than usual. Slack opens the attack. Name? Evelyn Lestrange, Mrs. Charles Lestrange, if you insist on formalities. Address? The old manor house, St. Mary Mead, 6 months lease paid in advance. Slack leans forward. You have been identified as the woman seen in the garden of Gossington Hall at approximately 3:20 yesterday afternoon. A mother-of-pearl button from your glove was found beside the foxglove border. An empty digitalis bottle bearing your fingerprints was discovered in the potting shed. Do you deny it? Mrs. Lestrange's smile is thin but steady. I do not deny being in the garden. I went to speak to Colonel Bantry about a private matter. He was already dead when I entered the study. I saw the cup, smelled the almonds, understood at once. I panicked and left by the window. Miss Marple speaks for the first time softly. You did more than panic, my dear. You returned later, after dark, with Dolly. You both believed the digitalis alone had killed him. You wanted no autopsy, no scandal. So Dolly added the cyanide to make certain. And together you locked the door and posted the key back through the letterbox on a thread. The thread broke. That is why the key was on the carpet this morning. Mrs. Lestrange's composure cracks like thin ice. How can you possibly know? Because, Miss Marple says, I have done something very wrong myself this morning. I opened your handbag while you were giving your statement. Inside was a letter addressed to Colonel Bantry, postmarked Cairo, 1943. Shall I read it? She produces the letter, blue airmail paper, much folded. My dearest Lucius, she reads aloud, the child is yours. I will never trouble you, but if ever you can acknowledge him, his name is Lucien Charles. He has your eyes. The room is utterly silent. Mrs. Lestrange, Evelyn, covers her face with the gray gloves. He promised to change his will, £5,000 for the boy's education. Then last month he wrote that he had destroyed the new will. Said it was blackmail. I came down yesterday to beg. When I found him dead, I thought fate had decided. Until Dolly telephoned in hysterics at 7 o'clock. She had just learned from Dr. Haydock that digitalis alone might not have killed him instantly. She was terrified of an inquest. We went back together. She kept the cyanide for wasps in the potting shed. I held the torch while she cannot finish. Dr. Haydock clears his throat. I suspected Mrs. Bantry last night. That is why I insisted on the post-mortem. But I never imagined two women. Slack looks dazed. So Mrs. Bantry administered the cyanide and you, madam, are accessory after the fact. Evelyn nods. At 1 o'clock the inquest is adjourned. Dolly Bantry is taken to the cells, veiled and trembling. Evelyn Lestrange is released on bail. Miss Marple herself stands surety. Outside the police station, the village waits in a hush. Miss Marple walks home alone. At her gate, Cherry is bursting with questions, but one look at the old lady's face silences her. In the parlor, Miss Marple opens the red Morocco notebook for the last time. She writes, Mrs. Lestrange, motive, son Mrs. Bantry, motive mercy, method digitalis, attempted plus cyanide, completed key, returned on thread, Broken moral, love, and pity can kill as surely as hate. She closes the book and places it in the drawer beside the two mother-of-pearl buttons and the scrap of gray suede. That evening the vicar calls, hat in hand. Miss Marple, the bishop wishes to know whether Mrs. Bantry may receive communion before whatever comes next. Miss Marple considers. Tell his lordship that Dolly Bantry acted out of love, not malice. Our Lord was merciful to the woman taken in adultery. He will understand a woman who could not bear to see her husband suffer. Leonard Clement's eyes fill with tears. You are a good woman, Miss Marple. She smiles sadly. I am a curious old maid who has seen too much of human nature. Good night, Vicar. Chapter 6. False Trails and Afternoon Tea. In the vicarage drawing room, the air is thick with scones, sympathy, and something very close to panic. Griselda Clement has laid tea for 20, though only 6 people have been invited. The surplus is for the curious who will just pop in. Miss Marple arrives first in dove-gray wool and the expression of someone who has not slept. Leonard Clement is trying to write tomorrow's sermon and failing. His blotter is a battlefield of crossed-out sentences. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away has been replaced by why, O Lord, 2 poisons? Griselda whispers to Miss Marple. He thinks the bishop will ask him to resign. The church typewriter wrote the anonymous letter, you know. Miss Marple pats her hand. Your husband is innocent of everything except growing prize foxgloves. Leave the bishop to me. At 2:30, Inspector Slack marches in, helmet under arm, followed by a sergeant carrying a cardboard box labeled Evidence. He has come for the typewriter. Leonard surrenders it without protest. Slack bangs out, You will be sorry for what you did in 1918. The E sticks exactly as it did in the anonymous letter. Case closed, Slack announces. Reverend Clement threatened the colonel over some wartime matter, stole his own digitalis, typed the letter to put us off the scent. Motive? The roof fund. Leonard goes the color of skimmed milk. Griselda drops a spode plate. It smashes into 12 pieces, an omen, Miss Hartnell will later declare. Miss Marple's voice cuts through the chaos like a silver knife. Inspector, you have arrested the wrong person for the wrong murder. Sit down and have a scone. Slack sits, mainly because no one has ever told him to do so before. Miss Marple produces her notebook and lays it open on the tea tray. Fact, the colonel died of cyanide, not digitalis. Fact, the digitalis bottle was planted in the potting shed after death. Fact, the anonymous letter was typed on Tuesday morning. Mrs. Price Ridley saw the vicar at his desk at 10 o'clock and the letter was delivered at 11. But the colonel was already dead by 9:15. She turns a page. Therefore, someone wished us to chase digitalis while the cyanide murderer walked free. A classic double bluff. Slack chews his scone and looks hunted. Miss Marple continues. Who benefits most from the vicar being suspected? Who knew the church typewriter sticks on the E? Who had access to the potting shed key? Who was seen near the church at 10:30 on Tuesday morning wearing a green headscarf and carrying a bulky handbag? Every head swivels toward the door where Mrs. Price Ridley has just entered in search of fresh gossip. Mrs. Price Ridley freezes, cream scone halfway to her mouth. I merely posted a parcel. Miss Marple's smile is gentle but relentless. You posted the anonymous letter, typed it, planted the digitalis bottle, and scattered foxglove leaves in the border to incriminate poor Mr. Clement. Because the colonel had discovered you were embezzling post office funds, £3, 7 shillings and 4 pence every quarter for 6 years. He threatened to expose you unless you repaid every penny by Michaelmas. You could not. So you decided to silence him and frame the vicar for the roof fund. Mrs. Price Ridley's cameo brooch rises and falls like a stormy sea. Lies! Slander! Miss Marple opens her handbag and produces a savings book in the name of Miss Amy Price. Balance, 127s. For the 6th, all deposited in cash on the first Monday of every quarter. Post office counterfoils, Miss Marple explains. Cherry's cousin Gladys works the evening shift. She noticed the pattern. Slack stands so quickly his chair falls over. Amy Price Ridley, I am arresting you for... But Mrs. Price Ridley is already moving. She hurls the spode teapot at the sergeant, dashes through the French window, and sprints across the lawn in a manner quite astonishing for a woman of 62. The chase is brief but undignified. She is cornered by the compost heap, still clutching her handbag like a shield. Inside, the missing post office cash box, a bunch of skeleton keys, and, most damning, a half-empty packet of cyanide crystals labeled for wasp nests. As she is led away, she screams, "The vicar will still lose his job. The roof will fall in. You'll all be sorry." Leonard Clement sinks into a chair and begins to laugh, or possibly cry. Griselda embraces him. Miss Marple pours the last of the tea and hands it to Inspector Slack. "Milk?" she asks politely. "Or would you prefer arsenic?" Chapter 6 ends. One false murderer is unmasked, but the real killer, the one who added the merciful cyanide, still walks free, hidden behind a veil of love and pity. Tea has never tasted more bitter. Chapter 7. The turning point. A hard frost has painted every blade of grass silver, and the church clock strikes 6 with the hollow sound of a cracked bell. Miss Marple has not slept. She sits at her bedroom window in a pink flannel dressing gown, watching the police car crawl up the high street like a black beetle. At 7:30, Inspector Slack knocks. He looks as though he has slept in his uniform. "We've charged Mrs. Price Ridley with attempted murder and embezzlement," he says without preamble. "But the cyanide came from her shop, sold to Gossington Hall last July for wasps. Mrs. Bantry signed the poison book." "I'm bringing her in." Miss Marple's needles click once, twice. "You will do no such thing, Inspector. Dolly Bantry is guilty of mercy, not murder. Come inside. I have something to show you." She leads him to the parlor where the red Morocco notebook lies open on the drum table. Beside it, 2 mother-of-pearl buttons, the scrap of gray suede, the empty digitalis bottle, and a single sheet of blue airmail paper. "Read the letter again," she says quietly. Slack reads. His face changes. At 9 o'clock, the inquest resumes in the village hall. The room is packed. Even the Boy Scouts have been allowed in. Dolly Bantry sits in the front row, black veil lifted, eyes red but steady. Beside her, unexpectedly, sits Evelyn Lestrange in charcoal silk. The coroner, a thin man with a voice like dry leaves, calls Dr. Haydock. "Cause of death?" "Hydrocyanic acid, administered between 8:55 and 9:05 a.m. The digitalis found in the stomach was negligible. Post-mortem contamination." A murmur ripples through the hall. The coroner frowns. "Then the digitalis was irrelevant?" "Entirely." Miss Marple rises, uninvited, unprecedented. The coroner blinks. "Miss Marple?" "With respect, sir, may I address the jury?" The coroner hesitates, then nods. "Inquests in St. Mary Mead have never been conventional." Miss Marple stands beneath the portrait of Queen Victoria and speaks in her soft, precise voice. "Colonel Bantry was a proud man. 6 months ago he learned he had cancer. 6 months to live, in increasing pain. Dr. Haydock warned Mrs. Bantry privately. The colonel refused morphia. He wished to die at his desk, master of his fate. But pride is a terrible thing. He could not bear the village to watch him waste away. So he chose a soldier's death, cyanide, swift and silent. He obtained the crystals from the post office in July ostensibly for wasps. He kept them in his locked desk drawer. On Tuesday morning, he dissolved them in his tea, locked the study door, and drank. Mrs. Price Ridley's digitalis was a red herring, planted by a frightened woman who discovered the body at 3 o'clock and thought she had caused his death. Mrs. Bantry's cyanide was never used. The colonel had already taken his own. She pauses. The key on the carpet, he dropped it as he fell. The open window, a last breath of air, the smell of almonds, the colonel's final signature. The hall is so quiet the frost can be heard cracking on the windows. Dr. Haydock stands. I confirm everything Miss Marple has said. I examined the colonel in August. Inoperable. I gave him 6 months. He asked me for cyanide. I refused. He must have obtained it himself. Dolly Bantry rises, veil thrown back. Lucius left a letter in the desk. I found it yesterday. She holds up a single sheet. My dear Dolly, forgive me, I cannot be a burden. Tell the village I died of heart failure. Burn. This. I burned nothing. Here it is. The coroner takes the letter with trembling fingers. The jury retires for 3 minutes. Verdict. Suicide while of unsound mind due to mortal illness. Dolly Bantry walks out into the frost without a veil, head high. Evelyn Lestrange follows, places the gray suede glove, now reunited with its button, into Dolly's hand. Thank you, she whispers, for my son. Miss Marple watches from the doorway as the 2 women link arms and walk down the street together, black and charcoal against the silver morning. Inspector Slack approaches, helmet in hand. I owe you an apology, ma'am. Nonsense, says Miss Marple. You followed the evidence. I merely followed human nature. She smiles, the smallest, saddest smile in St. Mary Mead. Pride, Inspector, the deadliest sin of all. Chapter 7 ends. The frost begins to melt and the village exhales. 1 man chose his own death. 3 women tried to protect him. In the end, only the truth was harmed, and even that gently. Chapter 8. Piecing the puzzle. The frost has turned to soft, reluctant sunshine, and St. Mary Mead is trying to remember how ordinary days feel. Miss Marple sits alone in her parlor, the red Morocco notebook closed for the first time in 10 days. On the table lie the relics of the case. 2 mother-of-pearl buttons, the scrap of gray suede, the empty digitalis bottle, and, newly added, the colonel's suicide letter. Returned to her by Dolly with a kiss and a whispered, "Keep it safe, Jane." Cherry brings in the tea tray, sets it down with exaggerated care, and lingers. Is it really over, miss? The colonel doing it himself? Miss Marple pours 2 cups, though she is alone. Quite over, Cherry. And yet, not quite finished. She opens the notebook to a fresh page and writes in her neat, slanting hand. Things I still do not understand. Why the study window was found unbolted on the morning of the death. Why the colonel's fountain pen was on the floor beside the chair. Why the blotter showed 2 half-written words. Forgive D. At 4 o'clock, the doorbell rings. Dr. Haydock stands on the step, hat in hand, looking 10 years older. Jane, may I come in? I need to confess something. They sit by the fire. He stares into the flames. I lied at the inquest. The colonel did not obtain the cyanide himself. I gave it to him. Miss Marple's needles do not pause. On the 28th of September, she says quietly. You visited Gossington Hall at 11:30. Mrs. Polk saw your car. You left at 12:05, long enough for a consultation and a small brown bottle. Haydock's shoulders sag. He begged me, said he would shoot himself if I refused. I thought cyanide was cleaner. I made him promise to wait until the pain became unbearable. He waited 3 weeks. Miss Marple lays her knitting aside. And the window? I opened it after he died. I thought fresh air might dilute the almond smell. I was wrong. The fountain pen? He was writing to Dolly when the poison took effect. He managed, "Forgive D," before his hand failed. I finished the sentence for him. "Forgive Dolly everything." Then I burned the top sheet and left the rest. Miss Marple rises, walks to the window, looks out at the quiet street. "You perjured yourself to protect a dying man's reputation and a living woman's heart." Haydock's voice is raw. "Will you tell Slack?" "No," she says simply. "Some truths are heavier than justice. You will carry this one to your grave, Arthur. That is punishment enough." He weeps then, silent, shuddering tears that would shock his patience. Miss Marple places a hand on his shoulder, light as a bird. "Go home," she says. "Drink whiskey, sleep." The colonel would have approved. At 6 o'clock, Dolly Bantry arrives unannounced, in a coat of midnight blue velvet and a hat with a single feather. She lays a small parcel on the table. "Lucius's war medals. He wanted you to have them, Jane. Said you were the only person in the village who ever understood him." Miss Marple unwraps the tissue. The ribbons are faded, but the silver gleams. "I don't deserve—" "You deserve more than medals," Dolly says fiercely. "You gave me back my husband's dignity, and you gave Evelyn back her son." Lucian starts at Eton next term. On the 5,000 Lucius never removed from his will after all. They sit in silence while the grandfather clock ticks towards 7. Dolly speaks at last. "Will you come to the funeral tomorrow? Just family and you?" Miss Marple nods. "I shall sit at the back. Old maids are good at that." When Dolly is gone, Miss Marple opens the notebook one final time. She adds 3 lines. Window, Haydock's mercy pen, Haydock's forgery, forgive D, forgive Dolly, and Doctor. She closes the book, ties it with ribbon, and places it in the bottom drawer beside the 2 mother-of-pearl buttons now sewn onto a small lavender bag that will never be given away. Outside, the street lamps come on one by one. Miss Marple draws the curtains, lights the lamp with the pink silk shade, and picks up her knitting. Somewhere in the village, a clock strikes 7. The case is finished. The puzzle is complete. And St. Mary Mead, dear, wicked, gentle St. Mary Mead, can go back to sleep. Chapter 8 ends. All the pieces are in their proper places, and only the fire knows the whole truth. Chapter 9. The revelation at Gossington: black coats, black hats, black gloves, black whispers. Dolly Bantry has turned the drawing room into a chapel of remembrance. White chrysanthemums banked like snowdrifts. The colonel's sword and medals on a velvet cushion, and, unexpectedly, a single red rose in a silver bud vase on the piano. No one dares ask whose rose it is. Miss Marple slips in through the side door, unnoticed amid the rustle of bombazine. She takes her place beside the French windows, half hidden by a potted palm. From here she can see every face. At 11:20 the room is full. Inspector Slack stands awkwardly near the door in his best serge. Dr. Haydock, pale and composed, pours sherry as though it were medicine. Basil Blake, unexpectedly sober in a dark suit, supports his aunt. Evelyn Lestrange, veiled in charcoal lace, stands alone by the fireplace, one gloved hand resting on the mantel where the colonel's photograph smiles down at her. Dolly claps her hands once, soft, but the room falls silent. "Before we eat," she says, voice steady, "Jane has something to say. Lucius would have wanted it." Every head turns. Miss Marple steps forward, small and gray and terrible in her quiet certainty. She speaks without notes, without raising her voice, yet every word lands like a pebble in still water. "This is not a confession," she begins. "It is a restoration." She places 4 objects on the piano beside the red rose: the colonel's suicide letter, the empty cyanide packet from the post office, Dr. Haydock's prescription pad torn at the September stub, a fountain pen with a scratched nib. On the 28th of September, she says, Dr. Haydock visited this house and gave the colonel cyanide, against every oath he ever swore. The colonel kept it in his desk until the pain became unbearable. On Tuesday morning, he dissolved the crystals in his tea, locked the door, and sat down to write to Dolly. Forgive D. He managed only that before his hand failed. Dr. Haydock returned at 3 o'clock, found him dead, finished the sentence for him. Forgive Dolly everything. Burned the top sheet, opened the window to disperse the almond smell, and left the key on the carpet to make it look as though the colonel had dropped it in his final moment. Mrs. Price Ridley's digitalis, Mrs. Lestrange's panic, Dolly's mercy, all were shadows cast by a man who chose to die on his own terms and a doctor who loved him enough to break the law. She pauses. The only sound is the ticking of the ormolu clock. 4 people tried to protect Lucius Bantry's pride. 1 succeeded. The rest of us merely watched. 8 no samurda, 10 albums. Dr. Haydock steps forward. His voice is hoarse. I will resign my practice today. I will face whatever charges the authorities bring. But I will not ask forgiveness. I gave a soldier the death he wanted, that is all. He places his stethoscope on the piano beside the medals. Dolly lifts her veil. Her eyes are bright but dry. Lucius left a codicil, witnessed by his solicitor the day before he died. £5,000 to Lucian Charles Lestrange to be held in trust until his 21st birthday. Evelyn, the boy, will never want. Evelyn Lestrange removes her glove, revealing the bare finger where a wedding ring once sat. Thank you, she whispers to the photograph. Then louder to the room. The rose was from Lucian. He is 12. He wanted his father to have one perfect flower. She lays the gray suede glove, both buttons now restored, across the sword hilt. Miss Marple speaks once more, so softly that everyone leans forward. In St. Mary Mead we gossip, we pry, we judge, but today we have seen love in 4 different shapes. A doctor's disobedience, a wife's silence, a mistress's dignity, a son's rose. Let that be the colonel's epitaph. She steps back into the palm shadow. The clock strikes 12. Outside, the sun breaks through the clouds and floods the room with sudden, startling light. Someone, Miss Hartnell inevitably, begins to clap. The sound spreads until the entire village is applauding, not the dead man but the living truth. Chapter 9 ends. The revelation is complete. The horror was never the crime, it was the mercy that dared not speak its name. And now, it has. Chapter 10. Tea and tranquility. Chapter 10 begins at 4 o'clock on the afternoon after the funeral meets, when the last carriage has rolled away, the last sandwich curled at the edges, and Gossington Hall stands empty for the first time in 150 years. Only one lamp still burns, in the small morning room that smells of beeswax and dried rose petals. Dolly Bantry has laid a tea for 3. White linen, the best Crown Derby, and a Victoria sponge still warm from the kitchen. She has changed into dove-gray silk, no black today, and her hair is pinned with the diamond arrow Lucius gave her on their silver anniversary. Miss Marple arrives first, carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Evelyn Lestrange follows 5 minutes later, hatless, the charcoal lace veil folded in her handbag like a secret she has finally put away. They sit in a triangle around the fire. No one speaks until Dolly pours. Lapsang, she says. Lucius hated it, but we are celebrating, not mourning. She lifts her cup. 2 absent friends, who are more present than ever. They drink. Dolly pushes the parcel toward Miss Marple. Open it. Inside is the red Morocco notebook, its ribbon untied, every page blank except the last. On that page, in the colonel's shaky military hand, to Jane Marple, the only person in the county who ever outgeneraled me. Keep this. Burn the rest. L.B. Miss Marple's eyes fill. She closes the book gently. I shall keep it always, she says, and I shall burn nothing. Evelyn leans forward. I have something too. She places a photograph on the table. A boy in Eton collar, dark eyes, the colonel's chin. Lucian arrives tomorrow. He wants to meet the lady who gave him his inheritance and his father's good name. Dolly adds a second photograph. The colonel in 1918, arms slung round a young Dr. Haydock, both laughing in the mud of Flanders. Arthur resigned this morning, she says quietly. The medical council will strike him off, but he has taken a post in a mission hospital in Kenya. He sails next week. He asked me to say goodbye. Outside, the October light turns honey-colored. A blackbird scolds from the cedar tree. Inside, the three women talk, not of death, but of life. Dolly speaks of selling Gossington Hall and buying a cottage in Chelsea, near the river, near the shops, near everything that isn't haunted. Evelyn speaks of Lucian's future, of sending him to university, of perhaps finally telling him the whole story when he is 21. Miss Marple speaks least. She refills cups, cuts sponge, listens. At last she says, in St. Mary Mead we have learned something rare, that mercy can be braver than justice, that love can wear many disguises, and that a locked room is only locked until someone finds the right key. She raises her cup again. 2 keys. They drink. At 5:30, the door opens without a knock. Inspector Slack stands there, helmet in hand, looking sheepish. Begging your pardons, ladies. I've come to return these. He lays the colonel's medals on the table, newly polished, ribbons pressed. The chief constable says no charges. Dr. Haydock's confession has been mislaid. Unofficially, of course. Dolly's smile is radiant. Thank you, Inspector. Will you take tea? Slack flushes to the roots of his hair. I, wouldn't say no to a slice of that sponge. He sits awkward in his serge and eats 2 pieces while the women pretend not to notice the crumbs on his mustache. When the sun touches the horizon, the 3 women walk to the gate together. The village is quiet. Curtains are drawn against the dusk, but every window glows with lamplight, as though St. Mary Mead itself is keeping vigil. Dolly kisses Miss Marple on both cheeks. Come and stay in Chelsea whenever you like. There will always be a bedroom with pink curtains and a kettle that sings. Evelyn embraces her next, a swift, fierce hug. You gave my son a father. That is a debt no money can repay. Miss Marple stands between them, small and straight. Go gently, she says, and remember the horror was never the crime. The horror would have been silence. They part beneath the cedar tree. Dolly and Evelyn walk arm in arm toward the waiting taxi. Miss Marple watches until the red tail light disappears round the bend. Then she opens her handbag, takes out the red Morocco notebook and tears out the single written page. She strikes a match, holds the corner until the flame licks the words, Forgive D, watches them curl into black lace and lets the ashes drift onto the frost. The book is empty now, ready for the next story. She closes the gate, walks home through the lamplight, and the village, dear, wicked, gentle village, closes softly around her like a well-worn shawl. Chapter 10 ends. The tea is drunk, the truth is told, and St. Mary Mead sleeps peacefully for the first time in 10 days, knowing that some secrets once spoken, allowed in love, cease to be secrets at all.